Romans 13. We are only, if we're lucky, we will get through 1 through 7 tonight, which that deals with how we look at how, well, it's dealing with a section of how we are to submit to authorities, what is right. And then we're going to ask some pretty tough questions toward the end. And so you better listen close, okay? Okay.
We just got threatened, Ed. These Bible studies are getting rougher and rougher. Good thing we're not in person.
Uh,
Or I feel like I'm back in law school, like I'm gonna have to take a test or something.
you better listen good, right?
Wow.
All right. Ned, would you read verses 1 and 2? Well, first of all, I'll make this little statement, this opening statement here.
Yeah, I like your opening statements because
You
you
like the
normally
opening
set everything up for us.
We got to have caution because political powers throughout the ages, and World War II is not exempt from this. So the Germans got a hold of the German church, the Christian church, and used this particular verse to try to make everybody point and be in line. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah, political powers have used the wooden reading of this particular section to align their population into compliance. But we got to remember there are some caveats to it. Okay, so we don't follow it blindly because there are reasons not to follow it blindly. Verses 1 and 2. Ned, would you read, please, sir?
We have to let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment.
All right. So how many authorities are there in the world? How many authorities are there in the world?
One.
Millions.
Yeah, there's one. And so there's no authority except God. And he loans this authority out as he desires. He doles it out to rulers, leaders, presidents, prime ministers, whatever, on a temporary basis. And
This also would have to, you have to read this in, like, you have to kind of read this along with chapter 12, verse 9, that you can be subject to authority but abhor what is evil. So I don't know if the German church emphasized verse 9 of chapter 12 by saying you can be subjected to authority but still hate evil.
Yeah.
And that while, yes, God would allow people, he does put rulers in place. I don't think Hitler was of God. I think God allowed Hitler to take power for a time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You think am I missing something?
Well, no, you're right. But he allows evil, and he gave authority.
Right.
So, but for somehow, some way, for a greater good.
Right.
And so, because Satan is a pawn of God, and he'll allow him to go so far. And he wouldn't. He allowed Satan and Hitler to go pretty doggone far. Huh?
So what we're saying, either good or bad rulers or people of authority, regardless, they're appointed by God, no matter what we think.
I can't say they're appointed, but they are given authority by God.
Authority.
And maybe we can look at that terminology.
So whoever resists authority resists the ordinance of God.
That's one thing we're going to talk about tonight.
Because it's kind of, Yeah, okay.
But I mean, that's wooden. That's the wooden reed on it so far,
Right.
right?
Right.
You would think, as Paul's writing this, and this whole little section is pretty much the same thing. It's just going to get worse. You would think that Paul was writing to a people who were under a relatively friendly authority, who cared about the people and served in good faith and were honorable. No, remember, he's writing to a people who were under the authority of the Roman Empire under Nero.
Which was horrible.
Horrible. Listen, this fella, um, he had his mother murder his stepfather because he perceived his stepfather was gaining some power. And she did it. And then she started gaining some power and he had her murdered. I mean, that's the perspective that Nero had. Of course, he burnt the Christians on poles around his
For light at night.
patio
Yeah.
area, yeah, for a night light. Um, Not a nice guy. He did not view anybody else's authority nicely at all. So we got to remember that Paul is writing, and he knows that his letter is going to be seen by the Romans at one point or another. No matter who it's delivered to, they're going to take it. They're going to do whatever. They're going to see the letter. So he's writing this letter with that in mind. There's just little doubt, Um, all right, verses 3 and 4, if you would, Kevin.
For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be afraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil.
You got to put yourself in the place of the Roman church who received this letter from Paul. From Paul, they got to be reading it, going, "What? Are you kidding me?"
Does he know who we're dealing with?
Does he know who we're dealing with? Does he know what's going on? It is interesting, though, that Paul lays out some pretty interesting concepts where he calls the emperor, the guy who's in charge, the guy who's given authority, God's minister to take care of the people. And he has the sword, which supports capital punishment. That's what that means. Somebody gets out of line, the evil person gets out of line, and the God's minister has the authority to take the person out. That's capital punishment. Here's an interesting verse here. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. So he's saying that just because of the law, you should do what it says, but also because you belong to God and it's your conscience. You should do this because you're a good person. And so he's saying that being subject to the government is equal to honoring God. And but there's a caveat. There are exceptions. Just verse 6. Ned?
For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing.
All right. In the New King James Version, it mentions the God's ministers again. They are God's ministers attending. So it really opens it up too. Not only do the authority of the rulers, those that have been set up, God's ministers is kind of spread out to anybody who's working for the government, tax collectors, that type thing. And again, the Christian Roman Church has to be saying, "What? Are you nuts?" Um, but as Rome reads this, they're going to be saying, "Huh, those Christians, they're not
Not bad.
a threat to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to leave them alone. Let them go. They're not going to bother us at all. Look, they're being instructed to follow our rules and get along. So we're not under threat, which is exactly what Nero needs to hear in order not to attack the Christians.
There you go.
Yeah,
Stomping it down a little.
stomping it down a little bit. But
Do you-
going back to God's ministers again, if we want to spread this out a little thinner, you could say on the wooden level that any job you have is God given, and we can be considered God's ministers in that job, which is kind of cool. I've always kind of
Absolutely.
felt
Yeah.
like I've had a calling to do certain things, and so God's ministers is being a calling, to do that job. You've been given an opportunity, you've been given an aptitude to do whatever it is, so you do it as if you're doing it for the Lord. You are God's minister in this regard. So keep that in mind.
So, kind of keying back to, do you think that this was written as a deceptive tool for the Romans?
To
Yes,
the Romans.
yes.
To the actual, not the church at Rome, to the Roman authorities.
Well, it was written to the church at Rome, but knowing
Right.
that the Roman authorities were going to get a hold of it and read it.
One and the same almost.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not bad instruction to follow, if you at all possibly can. Let's go ahead and finish up verse 7, and we'll talk more about that. Kevin, would you read 7?
Render therefore to all their due taxes, to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor.
Okay. Now, in our government, it's not all that difficult to follow the rules, pay the taxes, and all. Even though they do things with taxes we don't like, but nevertheless, it's the rule of the land. But I can imagine how difficult it would be under a Roman emperor at this time. Or let's say that ISIS, you were living in a place where ISIS took over. Would you follow their laws, that type of thing?
And you do have the option to move too.
For in the United States, certainly, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So to go back to what you were saying, Ned, was who was this to? The thought is with commentators is that it's a double message. Get along as you can get along, but knowing the rest of Scripture, that there are times that you ain't supposed to get along because it doesn't honor God. And but if the Roman emperor is reading that, he doesn't know the rest of Scripture. He didn't read Romans 12, for instance, like you said, 12:9, or many other places. Then he would read that and go, "Yeah, all right, press on."
This just kind of came to me too, is that it's not it's not that hard of a pill to swallow when you really stop and think about it. What he's saying is, be subject to the government, pay your taxes, recognize their authority, that it has been granted to them by God. In nowhere does he say, worship politics, seek politics as your God, or believe that, political jockeying or political powers are God ordained and established, or that God caters to either agenda. It's just saying, like, that makes sense to me. Pay your taxes, respect authority, abide by the laws.
Mm.
Like, it's not saying get in, like, you have to worship a political party over the other.
It's in fact, let me go to some of my stuff here. Really, it got into the separation of church and state, which we all know that that's not really in the Constitution, but it's implied by Jefferson in a letter, if I'm correct on that, which is a good thought. But it was his thought was that the state should keep out of the business of the church, and truly they should not be combined. We see nations in the past that were horrible with church states.
Where we came from,
Where
England.
we came from, exactly. The role of the nation state is for the good of the people. The role of the church is for the good of their souls. And so, and they should be congenial together, but not combined in any way, shape, or form. Can you really ever have a totally secular government?
I would not think so.
Probably not, because God established authority, right?
Right.
So the laws that come out of that are going to reflect the God that set it in place, if it's a proper government.
That is correct.
So you shall not kill. Well,
Where did that come from?
where'd that come from? Exactly.
The religion of the people reflects the people. I mean, or the government of the people often reflects the religion of the people. So you see, the papal state. I mean, you have historically Catholic countries, you have historically Protestant countries, and there've been a lot of blood spilled over the difference between the two.
Yeah.
You have Muslim countries, that predominantly have Muslim people. We are a predominantly, or originally we were founded as a predominantly Christian country. So, and that moves and changes over time, but I mean, at its core, our laws at some point, all law stems back to, a man on a mountain with two tablets.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's kind of where it all gets its root. So, I mean, I get what you're saying, that like God establishes authority. Is that just in Christian countries, or does he establish I believe he establishes the authorities in Muslim countries, and for what purpose, I'm not exactly sure.
Well, one guy explained this pretty good. Obviously every authority does not have God's precepts in mind. But he explained it pretty good. God gave me breath, and he takes care of me, provides for me, loves me. Yeah, but am I perfect? No. Same situation. A nation, one who's given authority as a leader, is not perfect. Some are way not perfect, way more than others, but nevertheless, they are in charge and in control. You guys ever heard of Bonhoeffer?
No.
Bonhoeffer?
German?
Yeah, German Christian. And he got involved. He was a pastor, and got involved with a plot to try to kill Hitler, and it failed. And he got caught, and he actually got murdered before the end of the war. But he's written a big book. I've got it here if anybody wants to borrow it. But and it's this struggle of trying to reconcile this and killing a leader and murder, but he's doing this and that type of thing. I mean, that was tough. That was tough. So
Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Bonhoeffer.
Okay.
Yeah, good story. You're welcome to borrow it anytime.
Yeah. Let me take you up on that.
Yeah. So the government is not always right. For instance, and we all know this, but with Pharaoh and Herod, both situations killing the baby boys, and with Moses' mother, and then Herod was going to do it with Jesus, and they got out of town. Both situations were illegal. They responded illegally. They didn't follow the government. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember, they were supposed to bow down. It's what the government said to do. That was the lawful thing to do. Stood up against it. Let's see. I mean, there's tons of just example after example after example where believers stood up and said, no, that's against what the Lord said. Or they were directly following what the Lord's angel told them to do at that time. So there are times to stand up against the government, but be very willing to take the brunt.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Mhm.
ever happen. There are times that I thought the commentator spoke about it quite well. We're told to do silly things with government sometimes. Governments just do weird, stupid stuff and make silly laws. And what do you do about that? Well, if it's just a silly law, just do it. If it's one of those politically correct things, just do it. If it doesn't defame the Lord, if it doesn't violate God's precepts, doesn't denounce or reduce God's authority, then just do it. Pay it, do it, whatever. Go along to keep getting along, kind of thing.
Well, and Rich, you talking about the imperfections of government reminds me. You and I had a conversation one time specifically about like the Supreme Court and how Supreme Court history is littered with horrible, horrible, horrible law that took years and years and years to change and do away with. I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson, the Korematsu decision during the war that allowed the imprisonment of Japanese citizens, Roe versus Wade, and there's some really good ones that are like turning points, but that change takes years and years and years and years and years. It's not like one president makes a few appointments and then boom, all the law that we don't agree with is done away with. So that change takes years. And those imperfections are scars, that we have to do away with.
That's it. I think in that same conversation, I think we talked about a great example is Daniel. He was taken away to a totally different country, and told to serve somebody he didn't like, love, respect, or anything in Nebuchadnezzar. And he did it, to the best of his ability in accordance with what the Lord's precepts were. He did it and blessed the man who took him away from his own country. And you just got to look at that and go, we are all exiles. We are not in our land. We are not where we belong. So we're sojourners. So we just bless the land that we're in, where the Lord has us right now. But I still believe that Paul wrote this in code, so to speak. Smart guy. Remember, he's well educated. He knew what was going on.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He stuck it right there in the meaty part of the book. Just kind of package it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And so let me ask you this: why shouldn't Christians turn their backs on the government and just say, "I'm not going to get a part of it at all. I'm not going to vote. I don't care." Why shouldn't we do that?
Well, to the extent of what, just not voting or not being
Or
involved, not being active.
Let's say don't pay taxes.
Well, because what you're doing is you're opening yourself and your faith to come under heavy criticism, like you're in another, you're better, we don't have to do this, we're Christian. And what you're going to do is bring shame, the wrath, the scathe of everybody. Hey, if I'm a sinner and I'm paying taxes, well, and so you stick out. And so you open yourself up for persecution.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I think Christians are called upon to be a standard bearer of what a law-abiding citizen should be. That Christians should all act in a way that if everyone else did, society would function. We would have roads and hospitals and schools, and we would all be able to function, with at least some semblance of like camaraderie. And if you stop doing that, the whole system breaks down. But if you start acting in a way that, if everyone stopped paying their taxes, we would no longer have police and roads and hospitals and, anything else.
As a Christian, they'll have enough to criticize you about without having being a low life or whatever. You open yourself up for so much, being a hypocrite. It's for me, that's the worst thing in the world. But God's saying you don't listen. If they look at you, you need to be the bearer of what I want people to be. They're going to find enough to criticize you and enough to hate you about.
Yep.
We don't need the whole taxes and other things being like you think you're better or you're part of here, and none of this stuff applies to you, because that's how you get segregated, and it's going to happen, but you don't need that to be the reason.
Yeah. I'll ask one more question. We'll let it lie. Does verses 1-7, does it mean that we can't criticize the government?
Well, in a sense, if it's wrong, I think you're bound to listen. Some people can speak up more than others. Okay, everybody has, as you said, everybody has their gift that they function in a church body, and everybody has their talents. Some people do not have a problem about stepping forward and saying, you know what, I call bull on that. I'm speaking up because what you're doing is wrong. And other people saying, you know what, I don't do good. And you're either the Moses type or you're the Donald Trump type. Moses and I don't even speak well. Why are you having me go and do that? So with that, I think you do have, you can speak up, right?
Never thought I'd hear that'd be the comparison, Donald Trump and Moses. But
well, it's about from one extreme to the other, though. You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
I mean, he's
that is an extreme.
Trump is neither priest nor politician, that's for darn sure. But you may like him or not, but and Moses was had to take Aaron with him because he said, man, God, I don't speak well. And yeah, okay, well, you take him along with you because you'll be just fine. Woo.
Well, Rich, I think that I believe in peacefully petitioning the government. I believe in peaceful discourse. I believe in a independent judiciary. I mean, that's what I do for a living. I still believe that you can address your grievances without resulting to name calling, without deflection of the issues. I think you can still say, I have an issue with your conduct and have it out. I mean, one of my favorite examples of that is Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. A Protestant and a Catholic getting along and becoming friends and bitterly disagreeing about political issues, but they got things done. And that, and we know that Jesus, not argued, but he debated the law in the temple. He reasoned with them. And we see throughout, that like it is possible to articulate your thoughts without resulting to name calling, without belittling someone else. And that's what we're missing. But on both sides. And it works. It works. Have you ever bought anything from anyone where they came in and said, "Hey, Rich, your hair's falling out. I got something that'll fix your, baldness." You're like, what? Like, you have to be a salesman. You have to be able to meet someone in the middle and like present something to them in a way that is reason. And I'm blurring the lines between this and politics, my opinion on things. But all of that to say, yeah, I think you should be able to criticize the government and call evil evil and call good good. And there's a way to do it right, and I think there's a wrong way to. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it.
Totally agree. You both are right. I baited you on the question.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rich.
But if we look at Luke 13:32, I got it up on the screen here. Jesus is being questioned by a Pharisee. On that very day, some Pharisees came saying to him, "Get out and depart from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected." Of course, they didn't know what it meant at that time, but he called Herod a fox, and that, from what I understand, that was a derogatory term. That was not a nice thing to say about it. He was criticizing the government, is what I'm saying, but he was telling the truth.
And he had authority to.
And he had authority to. In Acts 4:10, Peter's on his high horse, and he's, of course, Jesus already been crucified. Peter was talking to the authorities, and he said, I can just see him with a finger in their face. "Jesus Christ, who you crucified." And he went on to explain what happened, and he's talking to the authorities. So yeah, it is appropriate to challenge our authorities, even though they have God-given authority. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And so maybe it's our authority to challenge them properly and to do it in good term. So, makes sense?
To me, it all kind of boils down to, where is your identity? Is your identity as a Republican, a Democrat, American, a Mississippian, a Southern Miss fan, as a lawyer, as a teacher, or is it as a Christian? And obviously, as believers, our identity is in Christ.
First,
that should be above all. And that doesn't
mean ministers in all these other areas. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you could be proud to be an American. You could be proud to be a Republican. You could do all of those things if your identity is first anchored in Christ and everything else revolves around that. Yeah. Like, it is possible to live a respectful life in relationship with your government. I think a lot of people get that out of line, and they get those roles, reversed.
Well, I think what happens too is that, and I've been guilty of this some years ago, to where you think that someone will get into office with the same beliefs, same philosophy about things, and things are going to be okay. And you soon realize that they will all fail you and it's never going to be what you think it's going to be. And so with this, there's some mercy with both sides. But I will tell you now, both sides will absolutely fail you, disappoint you, and everything else. And there's only one person that will never disappoint you.
Yep.
So I think the sooner that we understand that, basically you're gonna, if you're looking at it right, you're probably, and pardon this, you're gonna be PO'd at all of them for the rest of your life, and none of them are gonna make you happy, right? Nothing ever is gonna be, there's always just gonna be that whole sin thing going on in there, and you're never gonna be content with this government. We must look above to the ultimate government.
If they are making you happy and they never let you down, you've drunk the Kool-Aid and you've gone nuts. Like,
And Ned,
something's wrong.
Ned, you bring up a very good point there, and that's what I see in certain factions, that they're just goo goo gaga, and it doesn't matter if they threw 20 kids off top story. We love you. I mean, this is
Oh,
the
yeah.
best thing that ever happened. And so maybe the frustration comes from, how can you guys be such idiots? And you know, here I go again. Sorry guys, but you know, it's like,
It's okay.
you
It's
just
okay.
want to sit there and shake them and scream and say, you know, you drank the Kool-Aid, and then you hit it right on the money. And so I think the sooner that I realize that, you know, for the most part, set your bar low and you won't be disappointed. You know, it is what it is.
Well,
It
and I
is
just,
cool.
by analogy, something Sammy and I have talked about over our marriage is, she is the love of my life. She is my best friend. I believe she is my helpmate. I believe God made her for me. Um, and I think she's about as close to perfect as it gets. But if I put all of my eggs and all of my trust and all of my expectations in her, and I put my happiness, I put my well-being on her, one, that's not fair to her. Two, she will let me down. She is human, and
Right.
that's not her fault. I mean, no, my joy and my identity has to be in him. It can't be in her. Like, obviously, she makes me very happy, but that's not the answer. It would be just as silly to say, like, I love the Saints. I'm a lifelong Saints fan, and they have let me down year after year after year after year.
I'm a Raiders fan. I think
God bless you.
you know, this love that you have for your wife now, enjoy it, because when she goes into labor, man, this whole thing may change. I'm telling you, I've heard weird stories, man. So just, she doesn't mean to hurt your feelings. I'll never have another one. Get out of here. You're the one who did this. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Back in the day
all
when
of that,
Bill Cosby used to do stand up, you know, and he had a great thing on childbirth. This is like taking your lower lip and pulling it over. I mean, and it was just, you would just sit there and just listen to this stuff, and it is old school, made so much sense. But yeah. So anyway, you got that going for you, Ned. So don't take it personally when she goes into labor. She still loves you. It'll be, when they give her that what are that epidural? What are that?
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll be just fine.
So,
She'll be-
all that to say, I think it's about identity.
Yeah.
And that's how you could take that passage out of context.
Your identity is with what government, I guess, is the question.
Yeah.
And ours is a government driven by God in heaven, and we won't be able to see it until, I guess, as the old folks say, until the great getting up morning.
Mm-hmm.
So
when the roll is called up yonder.
when the roll is called up yonder. So, but I think it was it was wisely placed, like you said, kind of middle toward the end of Romans of what he was writing, and written so that the emperor would see it and go, you know what? Yeah, just leave him alone. Now he didn't leave him alone very long, because just a few years later the Romans sacked Jerusalem, and tore down the temple and all that kind of stuff. But at least it gave the Christians there maybe a day or two. I don't know. I didn't research that. How long after the letter they were left alone? I don't know. That's a good question.